My name is Emily, and I was 22 when my world fell apart. I sat on my childhood bed, clutching my mom's sapphire ring, its inscription, "Forever my light, warm against my palm." Downstairs, my dad's voice boomed, accusing me of stealing $5 million from his company. A lie I couldn't unweave. My family turned their backs, believing I'd betrayed them. That night I swore I'd return stronger to make them see the truth. Have you ever been broken by those you love? Hit like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. Let's share this journey. I stood at the top of the stairs, my backpack slung over one shoulder. The weight of it, nothing compared to the knot in my chest. The dining room below was lit by the chandelier Mom had loved its glow, catching the polished table where my family waited. Robert, my dad, sat at the head, his jaw tight, a stack of papers fanned out in front of him. Diane, my stepmom, leaned back, her lips curled in a way that made my skin prickle. Chloe, my half-sister, picked at her nails, her eyes darting anywhere but at me. Ethan, my brother, slouched in his chair, his fingers drumming a nervous rhythm on the tablecloth. I took a breath, my sneakers squeaking on the hardwood as I descended. The air felt thick, like I was wading through a fog of unspoken accusations. I'd heard Dad's shouts from my room, the words thief and betrayal slicing through the walls, but I still hoped this was a mistake. Maybe if I explained, they'd listen. Maybe they'd see me, not the lie someone had spun. Emily, Dad said, his voice low and sharp like a blade honed by anger. Sit down. We need to talk about what you've done. I froze halfway to the table, my throat tightening. What I've done? I said, my voice smaller than I wanted. Dad, I don't know what you're talking about. He shoved the papers toward me, the sound of them scraping against the wood loud in the silence. Bank transfers, he said. $5 million siphoned from my company, all traced to your account. Care to explain? My knees buckled and I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. The numbers on the pages blurred as I scanned them, dates and amounts I'd never seen, all tied to my name. This isn't right, I said, shaking my head. I only handled payroll entries, small stuff. You know that. Diane sighed, her voice dripping with false pity. We trusted you, Emily. You had access to everything. Who else could it be? I looked at her, searching for a crack in her calm, but her eyes were cold, unyielding. My mind raced back to the late nights I'd spent in the office, double-checking spreadsheets while Diane lingered nearby, asking questions about the system. Had she been watching me? Planning this? I turned to Dad, my heart pounding. You know me, I said, my voice breaking. I'd never steal from you, from Mom's company. Please believe me. His face didn't soften. Instead, he leaned forward, his hands clenching into fists. You think you can play innocent, he said. After everything I've given you, this is how you repay me. The words hit like a slap, and I felt my chest cave. I glanced at Ethan, hoping he'd say something, anything. He'd always been my ally, the one who'd sneak me cookies when Mom was sick, who'd laugh with me over old movies. But now his gaze was fixed on the table, his jaw tight, like he was biting back words he couldn't let out. Diane's hand rested on his arm, her fingers pressing just enough to keep him still. Chloe finally looked up, her lips twitching into a smirk. She was wearing my old silver necklace, the one I'd left in the bathroom months ago, its tiny star pendant glinting against her collarbone. It felt like a taunt, like she'd claimed a piece of me. Maybe you should just admit it, she said, her voice soft but sharp. Save us all the trouble. I wanted to scream, to tear the necklace off her, to make them see the truth, but my words stuck, tangled in the panic rising in my throat. I'm not a thief, I said, my voice shaking. I don't know how this happened, but I didn't do it. Dad, Please, you have to trust me." He stood his chair, scraping back, and for a moment, I thought he might come to me, might pull me into the hug he used to give when I was scared. But his eyes were hard, like I was a stranger. "Trust you," he said. "You've broken that, Emily. You've broken everything." The words hit like a slap, and I felt the room tilt, the chandelier's light spinning above me. My fingers tightened around the chair, my nails digging into the wood. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. They believed the lie, all of them, and the weight of their judgment was crushing me. I looked at Ethan again, silently begging him to speak, but he turned his head, his silence louder than any accusation. Diane stood smoothing her skirt with a practiced grace that made my stomach churn. "Emily," she said, her voice soft, like she was comforting a child. "If you confess now, we can avoid the police. Think about your father's reputation." Her words were a trap coated in concern, but I saw the glint in her eyes, the satisfaction she couldn't hide. I wanted to call her out, to demand why she was so quick to pin this on me, but my mouth was dry, my thoughts a jumbled mess. I turned to the papers on the table, my hands trembling as I reached for them. Maybe if I looked closer, I'd find a mistake, something to prove this was all wrong. But the numbers stared back cold and damning, each line tying me tighter to a crime I didn't commit. My gaze caught on a framed photo on the wall, a new one of Dad and Diane at some gala, smiling like they'd never been happier. Below it, a painting I'd never seen before, all bold strokes and gold trim, hung proudly. It must have cost a fortune. A bitter thought flickered. Was this bought with the money they claimed? "I stole Dad," I said, forcing my voice steadier. "Where did that painting come from? The company's money." His eyes narrowed, and for a moment I thought I'd struck a nerve. But Diane laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the room. "Don't deflect, Emily," she said. "This isn't about us. It's about what you've done." I felt heat rise in my chest, a mix of anger and helplessness. I wasn't deflecting. I was grasping for anything to make them question the story they'd swallowed whole. But before I could speak, Dad stepped closer, his presence towering. He reached into his pocket and pulled out Mom's sapphire ring, the one I'd left on my dresser upstairs. My breath caught hope flaring that he'd remembered what it meant to me to her. "You don't deserve this," he said, his voice low, final. "You're no daughter of mine." He tossed the ring, and it struck my cheek, the metal stinging my skin before it clattered to the floor. I gasped, my hand flying to my face, feeling the warmth where it had hit. The pain was sharp, but it was nothing compared to the ache in my heart. The realization that he'd turned Mom's memory against me. I dropped to my knees, scrambling for the ring, my fingers closing around it like a lifeline. "Dad," I whispered, tears blurring my vision. "I didn't do this. I swear on Mom's grave I didn't." My voice cracked, and I hated how small I sounded, how desperate. He turned his back, his shoulders rigid, and walked toward the window. The room was silent, except for the soft ticking of the clock on the mantel, each second stretching the distance between us. I looked at Chloe, hoping for a shred of sisterhood, but she leaned back, her arms crossed, and muttered, "Just go, Emily. You're making this worse." Her words were a knife twisting deeper, because I'd once braided her hair, shared secrets with her under the covers. I'd thought we were family, even after Mom died, even with Diane's shadow over us. But now, her indifference was clear, her loyalty bought by whatever Diane had promised. I stood, my legs shaky, and clutched the ring so tightly it bit into my palm. My eyes flicked to Ethan one last time, but he was staring at his hands, his knuckles white. Diane moved to Dad's side, her hand resting on his arm, a silent claim of victory. I saw it then, the way she'd orchestrated this, the way she'd turned my family into strangers. I grabbed my backpack from the floor, shoving the ring into my pocket. My chest heaved as I backed toward the door, my mind screaming to stay to fight, but my body moving on instinct. "I'm not a thief," I said, my voice louder now, though it trembled. "You'll see. You'll all see." No one answered. The door was heavy as I pulled it open, the cool night air hitting my face like a slap. I stepped outside, and the door slammed behind me, the sound echoing in my ears. I stood on the porch alone, the weight of their rejection pressing down, and I knew this was only the beginning of the pain. The streets of Atlanta swallowed me whole that night, my backpack cutting into my shoulders as I wandered under flickering streetlights. The bruise on my cheek throbbed where Dad's ring had struck a cruel reminder of the family I'd lost. I didn't know where to go, my wallet holding just $12 and a crumpled bus pass. The city hummed around me, cars, honking strangers brushing past their lives untouched by the wreckage I carried. My mind replayed Chloe's smirk, Ethan's silence, Diane's calculated pity, and Dad's final words, each one a fresh wound. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over Ethan's name. He was my last hope, the brother who'd once promised to protect me when Mom got sick. Maybe he'd listen now, away from Diane's grip. I dialed, my heart pounding, but his voice came through clipped and cold. "Emily, don't make this harder," he said. "Just stay away." The line went dead, and I stared at the screen, my chest tightening like a vice. He'd chosen them over me, just like the rest. My legs gave out, and I sank onto a bench in a small park, the wood damp from evening dew. Tears burned my eyes, but I bit them back, refusing to let the world see me break. A street musician stood nearby, strumming a guitar, the notes slow and mournful, echoing Mom's favorite song, the one she'd hum while cooking Sunday dinners. The sound cracked something open inside me, memories flooding in her laugh, her hand brushing my hair, her voice promising I'd always be safe. Now I was alone, branded a thief, with nothing but her ring in my pocket. I clutched my backpack tighter, my fingers brushing the rough canvas, and tried to think. I needed a plan, a place to sleep, but every idea felt impossible. My old friends were tied to Dad's world, his company, his lies. They'd believe the rumors by now, the ones Diane was probably spreading. I could almost hear her spinning tales of my greed at her fancy dinners, while Chloe nodded along wearing my necklace like a trophy. A couple walked past laughing, their hands linked, and I felt a pang of envy so sharp it hurt. I used to have that, a family, a home, a place where I belonged. Now I was invisible, just another shadow in the city. My stomach growled a hollow ache, but I ignored it, too proud to dig through trash cans like I'd seen others do. I stood, my legs shaky, and started walking again. No destination, just movement to keep the panic at bay. I passed a newsstand, the headlines blaring about local business success, and my eyes caught a photo of Dad shaking hands with some executive. The caption praised his company's growth, calling it a beacon of Atlanta's economy. My stomach twisted, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. Growth, with $5 million missing. The lie was so blatant, yet they were thriving, parading their wealth while I had nothing. The injustice burned, fueling a spark of anger that felt stronger than my fear. My feet carried me to a diner on the edge of downtown, its neon sign buzzing faintly. The smell of coffee and grease hit me as I hesitated at the door, my reflection staring back from the glass, pale and hollow-eyed. I almost turned away, ashamed of my torn jeans and unwashed hair. But then I saw her through the window, Maggie, my friend from high school, wiping down a counter. She'd always been kind, the one who'd sneak me notes in class, who'd cry with me at Mom's funeral. Maybe she wouldn't judge me. I pushed the door open, the bell jingling, and Maggie's head snapped up. Her eyes widened, taking in my disheveled state, and before I could speak, she was around the counter pulling me into a hug. "Emily, what happened?" she said, her voice soft but urgent. "You look like hell." I opened my mouth to lie, to say I was fine, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I sank into a booth, my hands shaking as I told her everything. The accusation, the ring, the door slamming behind me. My voice broke as I described Ethan's call, his rejection cutting deeper than Dad's. Maggie listened, her face tightening with every word, her hand squeezing mine across the table. "You don't deserve this," she said, her eyes fierce. "They're wrong about you, Em." Her belief was a lifeline, but it wasn't enough to dull the rage building inside me. I wanted to scream, to march back to that house and force them to see the truth. But I was here in a diner with nowhere to go, and the weight of that reality pressed harder, threatening to crush what little fight I had left. Maggie slid a plate of fries and a coffee across the table, the steam curling up between us. But I couldn't touch it. My hands stayed knotted in my lap, my nails digging into my palms as I tried to hold myself together. The diner's hum, clinking dishes, and low chatter felt like a wall separating me from the world I used to know. Maggie sat across from me, her apron stained with ketchup, her eyes searching mine. "You can stay here tonight," she said, her voice firm. "I've got a cot in the storage room. It's not much, but it's yours." I knotted my throat too tight to speak. Her kindness was a lifeline, but it came with a sting, the shame of being a burden, of showing up broken at her door. I wanted to tell her I'd figure it out, that I didn't need pity. But the truth was, I had nowhere else to go. The thought of sleeping in that storage room surrounded by boxes of napkins and canned soup made my chest ache. This was my life now, reduced to scraps of someone else's generosity. Maggie went back to work, her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum, and I stared at the coffee, its surface still like a mirror, showing my hollow face. I pulled Mom's ring from my pocket, rolling it between my fingers, its sapphire dull under the diner's fluorescent lights. I kept seeing Dad's face, the way he'd looked at me like I was a stain on his legacy. And Chloe, her voice so casual, telling me to go. The memory burned, and I squeezed the ring harder, wishing I could scream loud enough to make them hear me. I needed a job, a way to start over, so I borrowed Maggie's phone to search for openings. My own phone was useless, the battery dead, and I couldn't afford to replace it. I scrolled through listings, waitressing, cleaning, anything, but every application asked for an address, ID, references. I had none of those, not anymore. Dad's company was a big name in Atlanta, and whispers of my supposed crime had already spread. I tried a gas station ad, walking 3 miles to apply in person, but the manager squinted at me, his voice gruff. "Heard about you," he said. "Don't need trouble here." I left my face hot, the rejection like another door slamming shut. Back at the diner, I sat in the same booth, my backpack at my feet, feeling like a ghost haunting someone else's life. Maggie slipped me a burger, but I only picked at it, my appetite gone. I overheard 2 customers at the counter, their voices loud, talking about a charity gala Dad's company was hosting. Diane's name came up, praised for her philanthropy, and I nearly choked. Philanthropy. With money she'd stolen, money she'd framed me for. The hypocrisy clawed at me, my anger flaring so hot I thought I'd combust. I needed to clear my head, so I stepped outside, the night air sharp against my skin. I walked to a nearby library, its doors still open, the smell of old books wrapping around me like a faint comfort. I wandered the stacks, my fingers trailing over spines, searching for something to anchor me. In a quiet corner, I found a worn copy of Mom's favorite novel, its pages yellowed. I flipped it open, and there in the margin was her handwriting, a tiny note, "Emily, keep shining." My breath caught my eyes, stinging as I traced the words. It felt like a message, like she was reaching out, but it only deepened the ache. She was gone, and I was alone, fighting a battle she'd never see. I tucked the book under my arm, planning to borrow it, but as I headed to the desk, a man at a nearby table glared at me. "Hey," he said loud enough for others to turn. "That's my bag you're eyeing. I know your type." My cheeks burned, and I stepped back, my hands empty, my voice lost. "Thief," he muttered, and the word hit like a punch, echoing Dad's accusation, Chloe's dismissal, the world's judgment. I fled the library, the book forgotten, my heart racing as I stumbled into the street. Back at the diner, Maggie was closing up her face, softening when she saw me. "You okay?" she asked, but I could only shake my head, my anger and shame boiling over. "They've taken everything," I whispered, my voice raw. "My family, my name, my future." She handed me a small notebook, her eyes steady. "Write it down." "Em," she said, "get it out." I took it, my fingers trembling, but the weight of my reality pressed harder. I was nothing now, a nobody in a city that didn't care, and the truth felt further away than ever. It was a gray morning in Atlanta. Almost a year since I'd been cast out, and I was sweeping floors at a small office building, the kind with flickering lights and stale coffee in the break room. My hands gripped the broom, calloused now, my life a blur of odd jobs and sleepless nights on Maggie's cot. I'd started to think maybe this was it, scraping by invisible, until a man in a rumpled suit approached me in the hallway. His name was Samuel, a lawyer who worked in the building, and his eyes held a quiet kindness that made me pause. "Emily," he said, "I've heard about your case. I think I can help, no charge. Let's talk." I followed him to his cramped office, my heart thudding, unsure if I could trust this stranger. Papers were stacked high on his desk, a photo of his kids tucked into a frame. He sat me down, his voice steady as he explained he'd been digging into my dad's company records pro bono after overhearing gossip about my supposed crime. What he found changed everything. He slid a folder across the desk, emails printed out, each one a dagger to my chest. They were between Diane and a shady accountant, detailing how they'd forged the bank transfers, how they'd planted my name on the accounts. One email even mentioned Mom Diane's words vicious. She always thought Emily was perfect. Let's see how perfect she is now. I read the words, my hands shaking so hard the pages rattled. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a calculated plan Diane's jealousy twisted into a scheme to erase me. My throat burned a mix of rage and grief as Samuel explained the legal side. "These prove your innocence," he said, "but prosecution's tricky." Diane covered her tracks well. I barely heard him, my mind stuck on Mom's name, on how Diane had used her memory to justify this cruelty. I thought of the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, believing I'd somehow failed my family when it was them failing me. Samuel leaned forward, his voice gentle. "There's more, Emily. I've got a contact who can push this further, but it'll take time. What do you want to do?" I stared at the folder, my fingers tracing the edges, and felt a storm building inside me. I wanted to run to Dad, to shove these emails in his face, to scream until he saw the truth. But the thought of facing him, of seeing his cold eyes again, made my stomach lurch. Could I even trust him to care? I left Samuel's office, the folder tucked under my arm, and walked to my old neighborhood, my feet moving on their own. The streets were familiar, lined with oak trees and manicured lawns, but they felt foreign now, like I was trespassing in my own past. I stopped across from my family's house, hidden by a row of azaleas, the brick facade glowing in the late morning light. A new car sat in the driveway, sleek and expensive, and I wondered how many lies had paid for it. The front door opened and Ethan stepped out, his phone pressed to his ear. My heart leapt a flicker of hope, but then my phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from him, short and cryptic. "I'm sorry, Em. Don't call back." I stared at the message, my breath shallow, the words blurring through tears. He knew something, maybe everything, but he was still shutting me out. I wanted to cross the street to bang on the door and demand answers, but my legs wouldn't move. The folder felt heavy in my hands, its truth a weight I wasn't ready to carry. I sank to the curb, the concrete cold against my jeans, and buried my face in my knees. The world I'd known was a lie, and the people I'd loved were strangers, their betrayal cutting deeper than I'd ever thought possible. I clutched the folder to my chest, its edges crumpling under my grip, and forced myself to stand the neighborhood's quiet hum mocking my turmoil. I couldn't stay here staring at a house that no longer wanted me, so I walked my sneakers scuffing the pavement until I reached a park near the city center. It was crowded, families, picnicking kids, chasing frisbees, and I felt like an intruder, my pain too raw for this normalcy. Then I saw the banners, bright and bold, announcing my dad's company picnic, a public show of their success. My stomach twisted, but I couldn't look away. Chloe was there, standing on a makeshift stage, her hair gleaming under the sun, a microphone in hand. She was laughing, charming the crowd. Her bracelet catching the light, the one I'd made for her 10th birthday. Its beads a memory of our late-night giggles. My feet moved before I could stop them, drawn to the edge of the gathering, the folder still heavy in my hands. She was talking about the company's future, her voice confident, but then her eyes scanned the crowd and locked on mine. Her smile faltered just for a second before it hardened into something cruel. She stepped off the stage, weaving through the crowd, and stopped in front of me, her perfume sharp and expensive. "Emily," she said loud enough for nearby heads to turn. "What are you doing here?" "Come to beg for forgiveness." Her words were a performance, drawing murmurs from the onlookers, their stares pinning me in place. I opened my mouth, but my voice caught the folder trembling in my grip. I wanted to show her the emails, to scream that she'd helped Diane ruin me, but my throat was tight, my courage crumbling. "You think you can just show up?" She continued, her voice rising, each word a blade. "After what you did, stealing from Dad from us, you're pathetic." The crowd grew, their whispers like a swarm thief and disgrace floating through the air. I saw a woman I recognized, a former colleague from Dad's office, her eyes wide with pity and judgment. Chloe leaned closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. "We cleaned up your mess, Emily. You're nothing now." I stepped back, my heart pounding, the folder slipping to the ground, its pages fluttering open. A man nearby picked it up, glancing at the emails, but Chloe snatched it from him, her laugh sharp. "What's this, more lies?" She tossed it into a nearby trash can, the crowd chuckling, and I felt my knees buckle. I lunged for the can, desperate to save the proof, but a security guard appeared, his hand firm on my arm. "Ma'am, you need to leave," he said, his tone final as heads turned, phones raised, recording my humiliation. I pulled free, my breath ragged, and stumbled away, the crowd's laughter chasing me. Chloe's voice rang out, calling for the picnic to continue, her charm seamless, while I was left exposed, my truth discarded like garbage. I sank onto a bench outside the park, my hands empty, my chest hollow. The world spun, and I pressed my palms to my eyes, trying to block out the shame, the betrayal, the unbearable weight of being seen as nothing. I had no fight left, no voice, just a broken heart, and a ring that felt heavier than ever. I sat on that bench outside the park, the sting of Chloe's words and the crowd's laughter still ringing in my ears, my hands empty without Samuel's folder. But as I traced Mom's ring in my pocket, something shifted. I couldn't keep running, couldn't let Diane and Chloe rewrite my story. I'd been broken, but I wasn't gone. Not yet. Maggie found me that night, her diner keys jangling as she sat beside me on the bench. She didn't ask what happened, just pressed a bus ticket into my hand, her eyes steady. "San Francisco," she said. "My cousin's got a place. You need a fresh start, Em." I stared at the ticket, the destination a world away, and felt a flicker of fear. Leaving meant letting go of the hope that Dad might call, that Ethan might show up. But staying meant letting Diane win. I boarded the bus 2 days later, my backpack lighter, now just a few clothes, and Mom's ring tucked close. The journey was long, the hum of the engine drowning out my thoughts. But I kept Maggie's notebook open, scribbling fragments of my anger, my plans. I wrote about Mom, her strength, how she'd fought for me, even when she was fading. I wanted to be that strong, not for revenge, but to prove I was still here. San Francisco hit me like a wave, its fog thick, its streets alive with voices and color. Maggie's cousin hooked me up with a shared apartment, a tiny room with creaky floors, but it was mine. I enrolled in a coding boot camp, something I'd never imagined back in Atlanta, where Dad's world had defined me. The classes were brutal lines of code swimming on the screen. But I stayed late, my fingers flying, driven by a need to build something no one could take away. That's where I met Lucas, a tech entrepreneur who taught our evening sessions. He was tough, his feedback blunt, but he saw something in me. Maybe the way I didn't quit, even when my code crashed. One night after class, he stopped me, his arms crossed. "You've got grit, Emily," he said. "I'm starting a project, an app for small businesses. Want in?" I hesitated, my old fears whispering. I'd fail, but I nodded, my voice steady. "I'm in." Lucas's offer was a lifeline, but it was the app idea that lit a spark. I pitched a feature inspired by Mom's love for gardening, a tool to help users track planting seasons, simple but personal. Lucas liked it, and for the first time in years, I felt a piece of myself click into place. I started writing in Maggie's notebook again, not just pain now, but plans, ideas for the app, and something bigger, a way to expose Diane's lies. Samuel had emailed saying he was still digging, that Diane's company was slipping, cracks showing in her perfect facade. It wasn't enough, not yet, but it was a start. I sat in my room one night, the city's hum outside my window, and opened the notebook to a blank page. My pen hovered, then pressed down, the words coming fast. I wrote about the truth about Diane's emails, about the life she'd stolen. I wasn't ready to share it, not publicly, but writing it felt like claiming my voice, like I was finally stepping out of the shadows. My heart raced, not with fear, but with a quiet fire, a promise to Mom, to myself, that I'd make this count. The boot camp classroom was quiet, just the hum of laptops and the faint buzz of San Francisco's evening traffic outside. I sat at my desk, my screen glowing with lines of code for the app, my fingers pausing as Lucas's words echoed in my head. He'd given me a chance, not because of my name or my past, but because he saw something I was only starting to believe in. I glanced at Mom's ring, now on a thin chain around my neck, its weight a reminder of who I was fighting for. I wasn't just building an app. I was building a way back to myself. I started staying later, long after the others left, tweaking the gardening feature, adding a journal function where users could log their thoughts like I did in Maggie's notebook. It felt personal, like I was weaving Mom's spirit into something real. I'd spent years Mom her strength, but my mind kept drifting to Diane, to the emails Samuel had found, to the life she'd stolen. I couldn't let her keep that power. So I reached out to Harper, a journalist I'd found online, her articles sharp and fearless. I emailed her a summary of my story, my heart pounding as I hit send, knowing this could change everything. Harper replied within hours, her message direct. "I knew your mom. She was kind. Let's meet." I stared at the screen, my breath catching. Mom's name in a stranger's words felt like a bridge to the past, a sign that I was on the right path. Wyla met at a small coffee shop, the air thick with espresso and rain. Harper was all business, her notepad open, her eyes locked on mine as I handed her copies of Samuel's emails. "This is big," she said, her voice low. "Diane's built an empire on lies. I can expose her, but it'll get messy. Are you ready?" I nodded, though my stomach twisted. Messy meant facing my family again, maybe even Dad's anger, Chloe's venom. But I did thought of Mom, to her, laugh to her strength, and I knew I couldn't. Harper agreed to investigate, promising to keep my name out until I was ready. She didn't publish it yet. I didn't publish it, but that night, I started a blog, anonymous, hidden behind a pseudonym. I poured my heart into it, every detail of the betrayal of the park. My voice steady on the page. I didn't publish it yet, but writing it felt like sharpening a blade. I pitched the next week at a tech showcase, my first time speaking to a pitch to investors. My hands shook as I stood at the podium, the spotlight hot on my face, but I thought of Mom's ring around my neck and started talking. I described the gardening, the journal, how it was about growth, about holding on to what matters. The room was quiet, then hands went up, questions flying, some skeptical, others intrigued by. I answered each one, my voice growing stronger, and when I stepped down, a woman in a blazer shook my hand. "That's got potential," she said. "Let's talk." I left the stage, my pulse racing, but then I saw him, Ethan's face in the crowd. His face half hidden by a baseball cap. My heart stopped, a rush of hope and hurt colliding. I took a step toward him, but he turned away, slipping out the door before I could reach him. The rejection stung, a fresh cut, but it didn't break me like before. I was done begging for his trust. I had my own now. I sat back in my apartment. I sat on the floor, my laptop open to the glow. I was ready to go, the cursor blinking, and my fingers trembled over the page. I didn't press it, not yet, but I felt the weight of it, the choice in it. I slipped the sapphire off its chain, Mom's ring, holding it up to the light, its sapphire catching the glow. "This is for you," I whispered, my voice soft but sure. And in that quiet moment, I knew I wasn't just surviving. I was fighting. The morning Harper's article hit, I was in my San Francisco apartment, the smell of coffee filling the air as I scrolled through my phone. Her words were sharp, clinical, laying bare Diane's fraud with receipts from Samuel's emails, no names spared except mine. The headline screamed betrayal, and by noon it was everywhere, shared across news feeds, dissected in group chats. My app had launched the same week, its gardening journal feature trending quietly, but the article's fire drowned out my small victory. I sat on my couch, my laptop open, watching the world react to a truth I'd carried alone for years. Messages poured in, strangers on my blog calling me brave, their words piling up in my inbox like letters to a ghost. One stood out, a woman named Clara who wrote, "Your story saved me from giving up." I read it twice, my throat tight, her gratitude strange and heavy. I'd wanted justice, not a spotlight, but now I was a symbol, my pain public property. At the office, Lucas clapped me on the shoulder, his grin wide. "You're making waves, Emily," he said. "Keep it up." But his team whispered when I passed, their glances sharp, curious, like I was a puzzle they couldn't solve. My past was no longer mine, and that stung more than I'd expected. Then Diane called, her number flashing on my screen, a ghost from Atlanta I wasn't ready to face. I let it ring, my pulse hammering, until her voicemail cut through the silence. "Emily," she said, her voice steady, controlled. "You've made a mistake. This isn't over. We'll sue for defamation." My hands shook as I replayed it, her threat real, her confidence unshaken despite the evidence. I pictured her in her office, surrounded by glass and steel, plotting her next move, while I sat here exposed, my savings barely enough to fight back. The power she still held twisted my gut, a reminder of how far I'd come and how fragile it all was. I checked my blog now, public, its comments a mix of support and venom. Some called me a hero, others a liar, Diane's allies spinning stories of my greed. I wanted to respond, to set the record straight, but my fingers froze over the keyboard. Every word I wrote could be twisted, used against me. I shut the laptop, My breath shallow and paced the room. The city's hum, outside a distant roar. I'd started this, pushed the truth into the open, but now it was bigger than me, a storm I couldn't control. That evening, an email from Ethan landed subject line blank. I hesitated, my heart catching, then opened it. "I need to see you," he wrote. "I'm in San Francisco for work. Please." No apologies, no explanations, just a plea that felt like a trap. I stared at the words, my mind flashing to his silence in our dining room, his text shutting me out. He'd known about Diane's plan, maybe not all of it, but enough to let me fall. Now he wanted to talk, and I didn't know if it was guilt or something worse. I closed the email, my chest tight, unable to decide if I could face him, if I could trust anyone from that life again. I stood by my window, the fog rolling in, blanketing the city in gray. My app's success, the article's impact, Clara's letter, they should have felt like wins, but they didn't. Diane's voice echoed in my head, her threat, a shadow over everything I'd built. Ethan's email sat unanswered, a weight I wasn't ready to lift. I'd fought to be seen, to be heard, but now that I was, the world felt too loud, too close. And I stood there, frozen, wondering if I'd survive the storm I'd unleashed. I didn't reply to Ethan's email that night. Instead, I walked to a corner store, bought a cheap burner phone, and dialed Maggie's number, needing her voice to ground me. She answered on the second ring, her warmth cutting through the static. "San Francisco treating you right?" she asked, but I couldn't fake it. I told her about Harper's article, Diane's threat, Ethan's sudden plea. She listened, then said, "You're stronger than you know, Em, but don't let them pull you back under." I hung up, her words lingering, but the weight of Ethan's request pressed harder. I flew to Atlanta the next day for a tech conference, my app's success earning me a speaking slot. Maggie insisted I stay at her diner, her spare room, a haven of familiar smells, fryer grease and lemon cleaner. I stood in front of her cracked mirror, practicing my speech, but my reflection looked haunted, my eyes shadowed by doubt. Diane's company was crumbling, news reports confirmed bankruptcy looming, and Chloe's name surfaced in fraud allegations. I should have felt triumph, but all I felt was a hollow ache, like I'd won a game no one else was playing. I met Ethan at a quiet cafe near the conference center, his face older, his jaw lined with stubble, his shoulders slumped under a gray jacket. He slid a small book across the table, its leather cover worn pages soft from years of handling. "Mom's diary," he said, his voice low. "I found it in the attic. She'd want you to have it." I touched the cover, my fingers tracing its edges, but I didn't open it, not yet. "Why now?" I asked, my voice flat, guarding the hurt. He looked away, his hands twisting a napkin. I knew Diane was up to something, he said. Not everything, but enough. I was scared, Em. I didn't know how to stop it. His eyes met mine, pleading, but I saw the truth. His silence back then wasn't just fear, it was choice. I wanted to forgive him, to bridge the years between us, but the wound was too raw, his apology too late. I left the cafe, Mom's diary in my bag, and headed to the conference. The hall was packed, faces blurred under bright lights, but I spoke clearly, sharing my app's story, its growth. Applause followed, but as I stepped off the stage, my phone buzzed a news alert. Diane's company had collapsed. Chloe's public statement blaming me, calling me a vindictive liar. Online, her supporters flooded my blog with hate, their words sharp, accusing me of tearing a family apart. My chest tightened. The victory I'd imagined now tainted a mirror of the shame I'd felt at the picnic. Samuel called that evening, his voice grim. "Diane's planning a countersuit," he said. "She's got money connections. It could drain you, Emily." I stood in Maggie's diner, the neon sign flickering outside, and felt the ground shift. I'd exposed the truth, but it hadn't set me free. It had trapped me in a new fight, one I might not win. I slipped Mom's diary from my bag, its weight heavy in my hands, and opened it, her handwriting soft, familiar. "My darling Emily," she wrote, "you'll find your way." But in that moment, surrounded by the diner's quiet, I felt lost, the cost of my actions heavier than I'd ever imagined, and I wondered if I'd ever find solid ground again. I drove out to Mom's grave that morning, the Atlanta air heavy with summer, my rental car's windows down to let the breeze in. The cemetery was quiet, just the hum of cicadas and the soft crunch of gravel under my tires. I hadn't been back in years, not since the funeral, when I was too young to grasp the hole she'd leave. Now, at 32, I carried her diary in my hands, its pages a map of her heart, and I needed to feel her close to make sense of the woman I'd become. The headstone was simple, her name etched in clean letters, a small patch of wildflowers blooming at its base. I knelt brushing dirt from the stone and opened the diary to a page I'd read a dozen times since Ethan gave it to me. Mom wrote about a day we'd spent baking my hands covered in flour, her laughter filling the kitchen. "You make the world brighter, Emily," she'd written, and I traced the words, my throat tight. I'd spent so long feeling dim, like Diane's lies had snuffed out my light. But here with Mom's words, I felt a flicker of something softer. I sat cross-legged on the grass, the diary open in my lap, and let the memories come. Not the pain, not the accusations, but the small moments, Mom teaching me to tie my shoes, her voice singing me to sleep. I'd been carrying her loss like a weight, but now I saw it differently. Her love wasn't gone. It was in me, in every step I'd taken to rebuild. I pulled out a pen and a sheet of paper from my bag. Not Maggie's notebook, but something new, and started writing. "Dear younger Emily," I began. "You're enough even when they make you feel small." The words flowed a letter to the girl who'd begged for Dad's trust, who'd cried on that park bench. I forgave her for her fear, for her silence, and it felt like untying a knot I'd carried too long. Maggie had texted me earlier, urging me to talk to Ethan to hear him out. I wasn't ready, not fully, but I thought of his face in that cafe, the guilt in his eyes, and I wondered if we could find a way back, not to what we were, but to something new. I tucked the letter into the diary, my hands steady, and stood the wildflowers brushing my ankles. I didn't need to carry the anger anymore, not here, not with Mom's memory so close. That afternoon, I drove to a community center downtown, a place I'd found online where people shared stories of loss and rebuilding. I'd signed up to speak my first time telling my story aloud, not hidden behind a blog's anonymity. The room was small folding chairs in a circle faces kind, but worn each, carrying their own scars. I stood, my voice soft at first, and started talking about Mom, about the theft I didn't commit, about the years of proving I was more than their lies. The words came easier than I expected, and when I finished, a woman across the circle nodded, her eyes wet, and said, "Thank you. You make it feel possible." I left the center, the evening sky streaked with pink, and felt lighter, like I'd left a piece of my shame in that room. I wasn't whole, not yet, but I was closer, the pieces of me starting to fit. I drove back to Maggie's, the diary on the seat beside me, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running. I was standing still, breathing, letting the world settle around me. Back in San Francisco, I stood in the middle of my apartment, the hardwood cool under my bare feet, the hum of the city, a soft pulse through the open window. I'd flown home after the community center talk, Maggie's hug still warm in my memory. And now I was here, surrounded by the life I'd built. The walls were bare, except for a single frame, a handwritten note I'd found tucked in my app's donation page, signed, "Only for your mom." Its words were simple. You gave me hope, and I'd hung it up, a quiet reminder of why I kept going. I set Mom's diary on the coffee table, its pages worn from my touch, and walked to the corner of the room where my small garden thrived. Tiny pots of herbs lined the windowsill, basil and mint, their leaves catching the afternoon light. I'd started them months ago, a whim that turned into ritual, tending them like Mom used to tend her roses. I watered them now, my fingers brushing the soil, and felt a calm settle, not the absence of pain, but the choice to let it rest. I'd spent years fighting, proving, running, but here in this moment, I didn't need to. Lucas called that evening, his voice crackling through the phone. The app's new version was ready, he said, and he wanted me to lead the next phase, a real role, not just a coder, but a voice in the room. "You've earned it, Emily," he said, and I heard the pride in his tone, the kind that didn't ask for anything back. I said, "Yes," my voice steady, and when we hung up, I sat on the floor, my back against the couch, and let the weight of that sink in. I wasn't the girl who'd begged for trust anymore. I was someone new, someone I was starting to like. Harper emailed later, her message short but heavy. Diane's trial was set, evidence piling up, and she'd likely face years behind bars. Chloe's plea deal was public community service in exchange for testimony. I read the words, waiting for anger or relief. But all I felt was quiet. Their fall wasn't my victory. It was just a fact, a chapter closing. I didn't need their regret to move forward. I thought about attending the trial, facing them one last time, but the idea felt heavy, like stepping back into a room I'd already left. I wasn't sure I'd go, not yet. I walked to my desk, pulling out a folder of papers, plans for a scholarship I'd been drafting, one in Mom's name for women starting over after loss. It wasn't grand, just a small fund from my app's profits, but it felt right, like planting a seed for someone else's light. I worked on it late into the night, the city's glow soft outside, and when I finished, I stood stretching my eyes, catching the garden again. The mint was thriving, its scent sharp and clean, and I clipped a leaf, rubbing it between my fingers. I sat by the window, the leaf's fragrance lingering, and looked out at the fog rolling over the bay. My heart was steady, not racing, not heavy, just there, beating. I thought of Mom, of the girl I'd been, of the woman I was now. I didn't have all the answers, didn't need them. I had this moment, this breath, this life I'd carved from the ashes. And as the city hummed below, I closed my eyes, letting the quiet hold me, knowing I was ready for whatever came next. I sat in the back row of the Atlanta courtroom, the air heavy with murmurs and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. It was early spring, the windows cracked open, letting in a breeze that carried the scent of blooming dogwoods. Diane stood at the defendant's table, her posture rigid, her face stripped of the charm she'd worn so well. Chloe was beside her, her head bowed, her hands twisting in her lap. The judge read the verdict, guilty for Diane fraud and embezzlement, years in prison. Chloe's plea deal held community service, a lighter sentence for her testimony. I watched my hands folded Mom's scarf soft around my neck, a quiet nod to the woman who'd shaped me. Harper sat 2 rows ahead, her pen still, her eyes fixed on the judge. She'd been relentless, her articles peeling back Diane's lies, and now she was here, a witness to the end. I caught her glance as the gavel fell, a small nod between us, an acknowledgement of the truth we'd brought to light. Dad was there too, in the front row, his shoulders slumped, his face carved with regret. I saw the tears in his eyes, but they didn't pull me like they once might have. I'd spent years craving his trust, his love, but now I knew I didn't need it to stand tall. After the verdict, I stepped outside the courthouse steps, warm under my shoes. Dad approached his steps hesitant, his voice low. "Emily," he said, "I'm sorry. I was wrong. I should have believed you." His words were heavy raw, but they didn't fill the space between us. I looked at him, his gray hair catching the sunlight, and saw a man who'd lost as much as I had, maybe more. I reached into my pocket, pulling out Mom's sapphire ring, its surface cool against my palm. "This was hers," I said, placing it in his hand. "It's her truth, not mine to carry anymore." He stared at it, his fingers closing around it, and I walked away. My steps steady, the weight of his gaze fading behind me. Ethan was waiting by the curb, his hands in his pockets, his eyes searching mine. "Can we try again?" he asked, his voice soft, hopeful. I thought of Mom's diary, her words about family, about forgiveness, and I nodded. Slowly I said, "We'll see." It wasn't a promise, but it was a start. A door cracked open to something new. We parted with a quiet hug, his arms brief but warm, and I drove to a community center across town, my heart steady, ready for what I'd planned next. The center was alive with voices, a crowd gathered for an event I'd helped organize, a talk for women rebuilding after loss. I stood at the podium, my notes simple, just a few lines to guide me. I spoke about my journey, not the headlines or the trial, but the quiet moments, the mornings I woke up and chose to keep going. The room listened, faces nodding, some wet with tears, and I felt a connection, not to their pain, but to their strength. I announced my nonprofit, a small fund from my app's profits, to support women like them, like me, starting over. The applause was soft, genuine, and I stepped down, my chest light, like I'd given something back to the world. I drove to a small diner after, not Maggie's, but a new place, its windows glowing in the dusk. I ordered tea, the cup warm in my hands, and sat by the window, watching the street come alive with evening walkers. My life was different now, not perfect, but mine. I had my app, my team, a purpose that grew from the ashes of my past. I thought of Mom, not with grief, but with gratitude, her love, a quiet strength in my bones. I sipped my tea, the world soft around me, and let out a slow breath, feeling the past settle, ready to carry only what mattered forward. The diner's glow faded as I drove out of Atlanta, the city's skyline shrinking in my rearview mirror. I headed to a quiet hill just outside town, a place Mom used to take me when I was small, where we'd watch the stars and talk about nothing and everything. The air was cool now, the grass damp under my boots as I spread a blanket and sat the night sky stretching wide above. I didn't bring her diary or her ring. I didn't need them anymore. Their weight lived in me not as a burden, but as a quiet strength, a reminder of the love that had carried me through. I lay back, the stars faint but steady, and thought about the years since that night Dad turned me away. I'd spent so long chasing justice, proving I wasn't the thief they'd named me, but the real fight wasn't against Diane or Chloe or even Dad. It was for myself, for the right to live free of their shadows. Forgiveness wasn't about them. I realized it was about letting go of the girl who'd begged for their trust, who'd thought her worth lay in their eyes. I'd learned to see myself, to know I was enough, not because I'd won, but because I'd chosen to keep going one small step at a time. I thought of the women at the community center, their stories echoing mine, their strength a mirror to my own. We weren't defined by our pain, but by what we built from it. My nonprofit was small, just a seed, But it was mine, a way to give others the chance I'd clawed my way toward. I'd found a life in San Francisco, a team that trusted me, a garden that grew under my care. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was more than I dared hope for on those Atlanta streets. I stood folding the blanket and walked to a small tree near the hill's edge, its branches thin but reaching upward. I'd brought a sapling from my apartment, a tiny thing with roots wrapped in burlap. I knelt digging a hole with my hands, the earth cold and soft. I planted it carefully, patting the soil down, a quiet promise to Mom, to myself. It would grow here steady and slow, just like I had. I stepped back, the night air brushing my skin, and felt a calm I hadn't known I could hold. The past was done, not erased, but no longer my cage. I drove back to the city, the road quiet, my heart full, but still. I'd faced my family not to win, but to close a door. I'd built a life not to prove them wrong, but to live right. And in that choice, I'd found something stronger than anger, a freedom that came from knowing I didn't need their regret to be whole. I was Emily, not their thief, not their shadow, just me. And that was enough. What moment in your life made you realize you were enough just as you are? Share it below. Let's hold space for each other's stories. If this touched you, please like and subscribe. It helps me keep sharing. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, pass it along. Thank you for listening, for being here. Here's to finding our light, to growing through the cracks, to moving forward always.